The cold metal of handcuffs bit into my wrists as Sheriff Sheila yanked my arms behind my back. Her breath was hot against my ear, her voice low enough that only I could hear the venom in it. "You think you can just waltz into my town and not play by my rules?" she hissed, tightening the cuffs until I winced. "I do not care who you were in Chicago. Here, you are nobody." Around us, my neighbors stood frozen, paper plates of half-eaten burgers in their hands, their faces masks of shock and embarrassment. Children stared wide-eyed from behind their parents' legs. The smoke from my abandoned grill curled into the summer air, the smell of charred meat now sickening rather than inviting. Sheriff Sheila paraded me across my own lawn toward her cruiser, her hand gripping my bicep hard enough to bruise. She opened the back door and roughly shoved my head down. "Tonight you sleep in a cage," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe then you will understand who really owns this town." What she did not know was that by tomorrow, her reign of terror would begin to unravel, because I was not who she thought I was. It was a perfect Saturday afternoon in Pinewood County, the kind of day that made me almost forget why I had really moved to this sleepy town 6 months ago. The sun hung high in a cloudless sky, warm but not oppressive. A light breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass and the promise of summer. I stood in my backyard, spatula in hand, watching fat burgers sizzle on the grill. "These are almost ready," I called to the small gathering of neighbors who had accepted my invitation. "Anyone need a refill?" Martha Wilson, a retired schoolteacher from 2 houses down, raised her glass of lemonade. "I am fine, thank you, Mark. This is such a lovely get-together. We do not often see new folks making an effort like this." I smiled the practiced smile of Mark Reynolds, the widowed factory worker from Chicago seeking a quieter life in retirement. The backstory I had spent months perfecting, with details scattered throughout my modest rental home. A wedding photo with a woman long since deceased, actually an FBI colleague with excellent Photoshop skills. Mementos from a factory career that never existed, all part of my cover. "Well, I figured it was about time I properly introduced myself to everyone," I replied, flipping a burger with practiced ease. "After 6 months of waving from the driveway, I should at least learn your names." Tom and Nancy Fletcher laughed. They were in their 40s, with 2 children who were currently playing tag around my oak tree. The Parkers from across the street chatted with elderly Mr. Jenkins. A few other neighbors milled about, eating chips and making small talk. It was exactly the kind of gathering I had hoped for. Casual, friendly, perfect for building trust in a community that had grown suspicious of outsiders, not that they knew why, not that they understood the cancer growing in their town's leadership. The flash of red and blue lights cut through the pleasant afternoon like a knife. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The children stopped running. All eyes turned toward the street where a police cruiser had pulled up in front of my house, its lights spinning even though the siren remained silent. "Is that the sheriff?" Martha whispered, her voice tinged with unexplained anxiety. I set down my spatula carefully, making sure my face revealed nothing of my thoughts. "Looks like it. Perhaps she would like a burger." Sheriff Sheila Hargrove emerged from the vehicle like a predator from its den. She was tall and lean, with short blonde hair and sunglasses that hid her eyes. Her uniform was immaculate, pressed to military precision. Every step she took radiated authority as she made her way through my side gate and into the backyard. "Afternoon, folks," she said, removing her sunglasses to reveal cold blue eyes that scanned the gathering with barely disguised suspicion. "Quite the party you have going on here." "Just a small neighborhood barbecue," I replied, extending my hand. "Mark Reynolds, I do not believe we have formally met, Sheriff." She ignored my outstretched hand, instead walking slowly around the perimeter of my yard, examining the folding tables, the cooler of drinks, the portable speaker playing soft jazz. "Do you have a permit for this gathering, Mr. Reynolds?" she asked, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer. A confused murmur rippled through my guests. Tom Fletcher stepped forward, his brow furrowed. "Sheila, it is just a backyard barbecue. Since when do we need permits for that?" The sheriff's gaze snapped to Tom, who immediately seemed to shrink under her stare. "That is Sheriff Hargrove to you, Tom, and I am just doing my job, making sure everything is up to code. I maintained my calm demeanor, though internally I was cataloging every nuance of her behavior. This was the woman I had heard so much about in briefings. The reason I was here, and she was exactly as described, drunk on power, looking for any excuse to exert control. Sheriff, I was not aware that a private gathering required any permits, I said evenly. But if there is something I need to file, I would be happy to do so for next time. Her lips thinned. My politeness seemed to irritate her more than defiance would have. She circled closer to the grill, eyeing the food. "You serving alcohol here?" she demanded, pointing to a cooler. "Just lemonade and soda," I answered, opening the lid to show her. "Feel free to check." The more accommodating I was, the more agitated she became. She prowled around the yard like a caged animal, searching for violations that did not exist. My neighbors watched in uncomfortable silence, the joyful atmosphere completely evaporated. "Mind if I take a look inside your house?" she finally asked, though it sounded more like a command than a question. "Actually, Sheriff, I would prefer if you did not. Not without a warrant," I added, keeping my voice friendly but firm. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The children were quickly gathered by their parents. Sheriff Sheila's hand moved to rest on her belt, inches from her handcuffs. "Are you refusing a request from law enforcement, Mr. Reynolds?" "Not at all," I replied. "I am simply exercising my Fourth Amendment rights, but you are welcome to stay for a burger if you would like." Her face darkened, and in that moment I knew I had made an enemy. But that had been the plan all along. Sheriff Sheila touched her radio, maintaining eye contact with me as she spoke into it. "Dispatch, this is Sheriff Hargrove. I need Deputy Collins at 457 Pine Street. Possible illegal public gathering without proper permits." The tension in my backyard thickened as my neighbors exchanged nervous glances. Mrs. Wilson clutched her lemonade glass so tightly I feared it might shatter. The Fletcher children were hurriedly ushered behind their parents. "Sheriff, this is ridiculous," Tom Fletcher said, his voice cracking slightly. "Mark is just trying to be neighborly." Sheriff Sheila turned to him, her posture rigid. "This gathering exceeds the number of people allowed without a special events permit according to County Ordinance 15B as a taxpayer. You should appreciate enforcement of regulations designed to maintain order." It was complete nonsense, of course. There was no such ordinance, at least not one that applied to private backyard gatherings. But the confidence with which she delivered the lie was impressive. Classic intimidation tactic. Create rules on the spot, enforce them with authority, and count on people being too intimidated to challenge them. "Sheriff," I said calmly, "perhaps there has been a misunderstanding. This is a private gathering on private property. We are not selling anything, charging admission, or creating a public disturbance." Her eyes narrowed as she stepped toward me. "Are you attempting to tell me how to do my job, Mr. Reynolds?" "Not at all," I replied, maintaining my composure. "Just trying to clarify the situation." "The situation is clear as day," she snapped. "You are new in town and obviously do not understand how things work here." Within minutes, another cruiser pulled up, and Deputy Collins appeared in my backyard. He was younger than Sheila, with a round face that looked like it was meant for smiling, though he wore a serious expression now. His eyes darted between me and the sheriff, then quickly surveyed the gathering. "Deputy," Sheila said sharply, "please inform our guests that this gathering is being shut down due to lack of proper permits. Anyone who does not disperse immediately will be cited for failure to comply with a law enforcement order." The deputy hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, enough for me to note and file away. Interesting. Not everyone in the department was fully on board with her methods. "Yes, Sheriff," he finally responded, then turned to address my neighbors. "Folks, I need you all to pack up and head home now." "This is absurd," Nancy Fletcher protested, but her husband quickly took her arm, silencing her with a meaningful look. One by one, my neighbors gathered their belongings, offering me apologetic glances as they hurried away. Martha Wilson touched my arm as she passed. "I am so sorry, Mark. This is not how things should be." Within minutes, my backyard was empty except for Sheriff Sheila, Deputy Collins, and myself. The abandoned food and decorations created a sad tableau of a celebration cut short. "Deputy, document the scene," Sheriff Sheila ordered, then turned her attention back to me. "As for you, Mr. Reynolds, I am placing you under arrest for conducting an unpermitted public event and refusing to comply with law enforcement." "On what grounds?" I asked, knowing full well what her answer would be. "Resisting an officer in the performance of her duties," she replied with a cold smile. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." I could have objected further. I could have argued the legality of her actions. But that was not why I was here. My mission required me to understand her tactics, to document her abuses of power. And what better way than to experience them firsthand? So I turned around slowly, placing my hands behind my back as instructed. The cool metal of the handcuffs closed around my wrists with a decisive click that seemed to please her immensely. "These are too tight," I said quietly. "They are supposed to be uncomfortable," she replied, leaning close to my ear. "Maybe next time you will think twice before questioning my authority in my town." She spun me around and marched me through my own yard toward her cruiser, her grip unnecessarily firm on my arm. My neighbors watched from their houses, curtains barely parted, afraid to be seen observing but unable to look away. "Sheriff," Deputy Collins said hesitantly, "do you want me to finish up here or—" "Secure the scene and then meet me at the station," she interrupted. "I want a full report filed on this incident." As she pushed my head down and guided me into the back of her cruiser, I caught sight of Tom Fletcher watching from his driveway. The fear in his eyes told me everything I needed to know about Sheriff Sheila's reign in this town. No one dared to speak up. No one dared to challenge her. The cruiser door slammed shut, and I was sealed in the cage-like back seat. Through the partition, I could hear Sheriff Sheila radioing in, making my simple backyard barbecue sound like a riot in progress. "Got one in custody," she said, satisfaction evident in her voice. "Bringing him in for processing, have a cell ready." As we pulled away from my house, I allowed myself a moment of genuine emotion, anger at the injustice I had just witnessed. But that anger quickly transformed into resolve. I had come to this town with a purpose. What had just happened only confirmed what the Bureau suspected. Sheriff Sheila Hargrove was not just strict or overzealous. She was corrupt to the core, drunk on power, terrorizing the very community she had sworn to protect. And she had just made the mistake of arresting a federal agent. The Pinewood County Jail smelled of industrial disinfectant and despair. Sheriff Sheila had personally escorted me to a holding cell that looked like it had not been properly cleaned in years. The concrete floor was stained with substances I preferred not to identify, and the metal bench bolted to the wall was cold enough to chill through my jeans. "Home sweet home for the night," Sheriff Sheila announced, removing my handcuffs with deliberate roughness. "Maybe a night in here will adjust your attitude about how things work in my county." I rubbed my wrists, noting the red marks where the cuffs had dug into my skin. "Is this really necessary, Sheriff? I was just having a barbecue." She laughed, a sound devoid of any real humor. "You still do not get it, do you? In Chicago, maybe you could do whatever you wanted. Not here. Here we have order. We have respect for authority. And newcomers like you need to learn that quickly." The cell door clanged shut, the sound reverberating through the small space. Sheriff Sheila lingered for a moment, watching me through the bars. "Processing will happen in the morning," she said. "Hope you are comfortable." After she left, I sat on the bench and took stock of my situation. Protocol dictated that undercover agents check in with their handlers every 72 hours unless circumstances made it impossible. Missing a check-in would trigger concerns at headquarters, but not immediate action. I still had time. More importantly, I now had first-hand experience of Sheriff Hargrove's methods. No charges formally filed. No phone call offered. No processing until she decided it was time. Classic small-town tyranny operating in the shadows of proper procedure. From my cell, I could hear the deputies at the front desk. 3 voices, one I recognized as Deputy Collins and 2 others. They spoke in hushed tones, but the acoustics of the old building carried their words to me. "Another one of Sheila's special guests?" one voice asked. "Yeah, the new guy from Chicago. Had a barbecue without getting her permission first," another replied, followed by a snicker. "Like the Henderson kid last month, the one with the loud music," the first voice again. "Similar, though she let the Henderson boy go after his daddy made that donation to the department fund." Their conversation shifted to mundane topics, sports scores, weekend plans, complaints about shift schedules. But I had heard enough. Selective enforcement, implied bribery, the pieces were fitting together. Hours passed. A deputy I had not seen before brought a tray with a sandwich and a small carton of milk, sliding it through the slot in the cell door without making eye contact. Night fell, and the jail grew quieter. Only the occasional radio chatter and the hum of fluorescent lights broke the silence. Around midnight, footsteps approached my cell. Sheriff Sheila appeared, accompanied by a deputy I had not seen before, older, with a weathered face and dead eyes. The kind of man who had seen too much and decided not to care anymore. "This is him?" the deputy asked, eyeing me with disinterest. Sheriff Sheila nodded. "Chicago boy thinks he can come down here and do as he pleases." "Like that professor last year, the one asking questions about the county budget." "Exactly like that," Sheriff Sheila replied, too curious for his own good. They spoke about me as if I were not there, as if I were an object rather than a person. It was a deliberate tactic, one I had seen before in interrogations. Dehumanize the subject, make them feel powerless. "What did you do with his phone?" the deputy asked. "It is in evidence," Sheriff Sheila replied. "We will go through it tomorrow, see who he has been talking to." My encrypted FBI phone was safe at my cabin, hidden in a compartment designed for exactly this purpose. The phone they had taken was my cover phone, filled with carefully crafted text messages, photos, and contacts that supported my backstory as Mark Reynolds. After they left, I lay on the hard bench and stared at the ceiling. In the stillness of the night, my mind reviewed the FBI protocol for situations like this. I had three options: maintain cover and endure whatever came next, contact my handler through emergency channels and potentially compromise the operation, or reveal myself to Sheriff Sheila, effectively ending months of careful infiltration. The choice was clear. I would maintain my cover. This arrest was actually an opportunity, a chance to observe Sheriff Sheila's operation from the inside, to witness firsthand how she processed prisoners, how she bent or broke the rules. The evidence I could gather would be invaluable. Morning came with the sound of keys jangling and cell doors opening. Deputy Collins appeared, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Reynolds, the sheriff wants to see you in her office." I was escorted through the small station to Sheriff Sheila's office at the back. Unlike the rest of the dated building, her space was renovated and well-appointed. A large oak desk dominated the room, behind which Sheriff Sheila sat reviewing papers. She did not look up when I entered. "Sit," she commanded, pointing to a chair across from her desk. I sat and waited, another power play on her part. Finally, she set her papers aside and looked at me, her expression unreadable. "So Mark Reynolds from Chicago," she said, drawing out my name. "No priors, no outstanding warrants, nothing on your record at all, almost too clean." I remained silent, letting her continue her performance. "You bought the old Wilson place 6 months ago. Cash purchase. Keep to yourself mostly. Until yesterday, when suddenly you decide to become the neighborhood social director." She leaned forward, her eyes cold and calculating. "What I want to know is why. Why here? Why Pinewood County? What are you really doing in my town?" The moment stretched between us, a silent battle of wills. I knew then that I had been right to come here. Something was very wrong in Pinewood County, and Sheriff Sheila Hargrove was at the center of it all. "I came here for peace and quiet," I answered Sheriff Sheila, maintaining eye contact. "After my wife died, Chicago had too many memories. I wanted somewhere smaller, somewhere simpler." Her eyes narrowed, searching my face for deception. "And you just happened to pick Pinewood County, out of all the small towns in America." My late wife's cousin lived here briefly in the 90s, I replied, the practiced lie flowing smoothly. She always spoke highly of it, said the people were friendly. I allowed a touch of irony to enter my voice at the last statement. Sheriff Sheila's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She shuffled through papers on her desk, then abruptly stood up. "You are free to go, Mr. Reynolds, this time." She walked around her desk, invading my personal space. "Consider this a warning. In my county, we follow rules, my rules. Step out of line again, and the outcome will not be so pleasant. No charges, no paperwork, no record of my night in jail, just as I had suspected. Sheriff Sheila operated in the gray areas where accountability could not reach her. Deputy Collins escorted me out, handing me a plastic bag containing my wallet, keys, and cover phone. "Your car is still at your house," he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "The diner is just 2 blocks east if you need to get breakfast or call a ride." Something in his tone made me look at him more closely. The junior deputy was uncomfortable with this situation. Another detail to file away. The morning air felt unusually sweet after a night in that cell. I walked the 2 blocks to the Pinewood Diner, my body stiff from the hard bench that had served as my bed. The small restaurant was half full, mostly with workers grabbing breakfast before their shifts. A bell jingled as I pushed open the door. Conversations halted for a moment as the locals took note of me, the stranger who had been arrested at his own barbecue. Whispers followed me to the counter where I took a seat. "Coffee?" A waitress appeared before me, coffee pot in hand. Her name tag read Jess. She was perhaps 30, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that had seen more than their share of hardship. "Please," I replied, "and whatever breakfast special you recommend." She poured the coffee, then leaned slightly closer. "You are the barbecue guy, right? The one Sheila dragged away yesterday." I nodded, sipping the strong black coffee. It was surprisingly good. "Word travels fast," I commented. Jess snorted. "In a town this size, faster than light." She glanced around, then lowered her voice. "Look, I will get your order in, but just so you know, whatever they told you about why you were arrested, it was bull. Sheriff Sheila does not need reasons, just excuses." Before I could respond, she had moved away to place my order. Interesting. Not everyone in town was afraid to speak out, but they were careful about it. My food arrived quickly: eggs, bacon, toast, and hash browns. As I ate, I observed the diner's dynamics. When the door jingled and Deputy Robertson entered, the older deputy who had visited my cell with Sheriff Sheila, conversations dimmed. People suddenly became very interested in their food. Jess's friendly demeanor cooled noticeably as she took his order. When she returned to refill my coffee, I took a chance. Seems like the deputy is not the most popular customer. Jess's eyes flicked to Robertson and back to me. "Sheriff's right-hand man, does all her dirty work." She hesitated, then added, "My brother crossed paths with them last year. He is still serving 6 months for a broken taillight that somehow turned into possession charges." "Possession of what?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "They said they found pills in his glove compartment," she replied bitterly. "Prescription pills without a bottle, except Michael never took prescriptions in his life." It was the same pattern, evidence appearing where none existed before, charges escalating from minor infractions to serious offenses. The classic tactics of corrupt law enforcement. "That must be tough," I said sympathetically, "for both of you." Something in my tone must have resonated with her. Jess studied me for a moment, then pulled out her order pad and scribbled something on it. She tore off the sheet and slid it across the counter to me along with my check. "If you ever want to hear more about how things really work in Pinewood County, some of us meet at Miller's Auto Shop on Thursday nights. Book club officially." She gave me a meaningful look. "We read a lot about justice these days." I pocketed the note with the address, paid my bill, and left her a generous tip. As I walked out, I felt Deputy Robertson's eyes following me. The next few days were quiet. I maintained my routine: morning jogs through town, trips to the local market, occasional visits to the hardware store where I pretended to gather supplies for home improvement projects. But now I noticed things I had overlooked before. The way people tensed when a police cruiser drove by. How conversations shifted to safer topics when uniformed officers entered a shop. The subtle atmosphere of fear that permeated Pinewood County. Thursday evening arrived, and I made my way to Miller's auto shop on the edge of town. The garage itself was closed, but lights glowed from a side room. I knocked on the door marked office, and after a moment it opened to reveal a heavy-set man with grease-stained hands. "You the barbecue guy?" he asked bluntly. "Mark Reynolds," I confirmed, extending my hand. He studied me for a moment before shaking it. "Ted Miller, come on in." The office had been converted into a makeshift meeting room. A circle of mismatched chairs held about 10 people, including Jess from the diner. Some faces I recognized from town, others were new to me. "Everyone," Ted announced, "this is Mark Reynolds, Sheriff Sheila's latest victim." There were nods of recognition and sympathy. An older woman with silver hair gestured to an empty chair beside her. "Welcome to the resistance, Mr. Reynolds," she said with a grim smile. "Small as it is." For the next 2 hours, I listened to their stories. The retired teacher who questioned budget allocations at a town meeting and found herself facing trumped-up charges of disorderly conduct. The business owner who refused to make a donation to the sheriff's department fund and suddenly faced weekly health code inspections. The teenager who was caught with marijuana planted in his locker after he spoke out about a deputy's rough treatment of his friend. Pattern after pattern, all pointing to the same conclusion. Sheriff Sheila Hargrove had built a small empire of corruption in Pinewood County, ruling through fear, intimidation, and selective enforcement of laws that often existed only in her mind. As the meeting wound down, Ted Miller approached me. "So, Mark, now that you have heard it all, what do you think?" All eyes turned to me, weighing, judging, deciding whether I could be trusted. "I think," I said carefully, "that someone needs to stop her." Back in my rented cabin, I unlocked the false bottom of my bedroom dresser drawer and removed the encrypted satellite phone. It had been 3 days since my arrest. Time to check in. I entered the complex series of codes that would connect me securely to my handler at the bureau. "Pinewood Operation Agent reporting," I said when the connection established. "Status green." "Confirmation required," came the crisp response. "Whiskey Echo 79 Delta," I replied, providing my authentication sequence. "Confirmed, status update requested." I took a deep breath. Initial contact made with primary target, confirmation of suspected constitutional violations, evidence of widespread corruption and abuse of power, request continuation of deep cover operation. There was a pause on the other end. Details of contact. "I was detained without cause, held without charges, released without processing," I summarized. "Classic intimidation tactics. I have also made contact with locals who corroborate earlier reports of evidence tampering, false arrests, and extortion." Another pause. "Operational parameters remain in effect. Primary mission objective unchanged. Continue gathering evidence on firearms trafficking through county channels." This was the moment of decision. My original assignment, the reason I had been sent to Pinewood County, was to investigate reports that seized weapons were being redirected through Sheriff Hargrove's department to private buyers across state lines. A serious federal offense, but largely invisible to the local population. What I had discovered instead was a cancer eating away at the heart of the community itself. The firearms case would eventually bring Sheriff Sheila down, but it would not address the damage she had already done to countless lives in Pinewood County. "Request adjustment to operational parameters," I said firmly. "Target's abuse of power presents significant threat to civilian constitutional rights. Evidence of firearms trafficking may be secondary to broader pattern of corruption." The silence stretched longer this time. Finally, "Adjustment denied. Maintain focus on primary objective. Local abuses are not federal jurisdiction unless specific criteria are met." I closed my eyes, frustration building. This was bureaucracy at its worst, compartmentalized thinking that missed the bigger picture. "Understood," I replied, knowing my tone conveyed my disagreement. Next check-in will be in 72 hours unless circumstances dictate otherwise. Confirmed, maintain cover integrity at all costs. The line went dead. I returned the phone to its hiding place and moved to the window, looking out at the darkened forest surrounding my cabin. In the distance, the lights of Pinewood proper glowed faintly against the night sky. 2 years of my life had gone into building the identity of Mark Reynolds. 2 years of careful background construction, of learning to be someone else so completely that it became second nature. My cabin walls held the evidence, photos of my late wife, Sarah, actually Agent Catherine Mills from the Denver office, mementos from a factory career that never existed, books and music carefully chosen to reflect Mark's tastes rather than my own. Even my body told the story. I had deliberately gained 15 pounds to soften my normally athletic frame, grown a beard that my real-world self would never wear, adopted a slight slouch to disguise my military bearing. Mark Reynolds was a masterpiece of deception, crafted with painstaking attention to detail. And now I faced a choice. Continue as directed, focusing narrowly on the firearms investigation while witnessing Sheriff Sheila's reign of terror continue. Or expand my mission, gathering evidence on all her crimes, even if it meant operating beyond my official parameters. It was not really a choice at all. I pulled out a notebook and began mapping what I knew. Sheriff Sheila Hargrove had been in power for 6 years, rising quickly from deputy to sheriff after her predecessor's unexpected retirement. The timing coincided with the beginning of the strange patterns in the county, the selective enforcement, the fear, the corruption. Key deputies, Robertson, her enforcer; Collins, younger and possibly uncertain about the system he served. Others I had glimpsed but not yet assessed. The mayor appeared to be either complicit or cowed. Victims, Jess's brother Michael, the mechanic's son, the retired teacher, the business owner, how many more? I considered my options. The book club at Miller's auto shop represented potential allies, but involving civilians carried risks. Deputy Collins showed signs of a conscience. He might be turned, given the right approach. And Sheriff Sheila herself had given me the perfect opening by arresting me. Now I had legitimate reason to interact with her, to probe deeper. A plan began to form in my mind. Sheriff Sheila's power depended on fear and isolation. She separated her victims, made each feel alone in their struggle against her. But what if those victims found common cause? What if someone began collecting evidence systematically, building a case too strong to ignore? I would need to be careful. One wrong move and my cover would be blown. Worse, Sheriff Sheila might escalate her tactics against those who opposed her. But the risk was necessary. The people of Pinewood County deserved justice. As I prepared for bed, I glanced at the framed photo of my wife on the nightstand. For a moment, I allowed myself to remember who I really was. Not Mark Reynolds, widower from Chicago, but Special Agent James Cooper, FBI. A man with a mission and the skills to complete it. Tomorrow, I would begin phase 2 of my operation. Sheriff Sheila thought she had taught me a lesson with that night in jail. In reality, she had only ensured her own downfall. Because now it was personal. It was just after sundown when I witnessed something that confirmed everything I had begun to suspect about Sheriff Sheila. The sky had turned that deep purple blue that settles over small towns after the heat of the day breaks. Main Street was quiet except for the occasional pickup rumbling through and the faint sounds of classic rock drifting from the tavern 2 blocks down. I had positioned myself at Johnson's Hardware, pretending to browse through the clearance tools while keeping an eye on the street through the large front windows. The store was about to close, and Mr. Johnson was counting the register when the flash of red and blue lights caught my attention. Sheriff Sheila had pulled over a weathered red Chevy truck near the abandoned Texaco station. I recognized the vehicle immediately. It belonged to Rico Mendez, the 22-year-old son of Manuel, who ran the only decent auto repair shop in the county. Rico was a hardworking kid who had turned down college scholarships to help his father with the family business after his mother's cancer diagnosis. I casually moved closer to the window, positioning myself between 2 large display racks where I could observe without being obvious. Rico stepped out of his truck looking confused. His work clothes were still smudged with grease from a long day at the garage. Sheriff Sheila circled him like a predator, speaking words I could not hear from this distance, but her body language told the story. She was not conducting a routine traffic stop. She was hunting. "You closing up soon, Mr. Johnson?" I called back casually, never taking my eyes off the scene unfolding across the street. "Just about done, Mark. Take your time looking at those wrenches." He had no idea what was really holding my attention. Sheriff Sheila ordered Rico to step away from his vehicle. She then began searching the truck without consent, a clear Fourth Amendment violation. What happened next made my blood run cold. When she thought no one was watching, she reached into her uniform pocket and subtly transferred a small plastic baggie to her other hand. Seconds later, she was dramatically discovering it under the driver's seat of Rico's truck. I had seen enough planted evidence in my career to recognize the move. It was textbook corruption, but executed with the casual confidence of someone who had done it countless times before. Rico's face transformed from confusion to disbelief to terror as she held up the baggie. Even from this distance, I could see the poor kid was about to have his life ruined. I glanced up at the corner of the hardware store ceiling and noticed the security camera pointed directly toward the street. That was when inspiration struck. "Mr. Johnson," I said, turning toward the counter with my most neighborly smile. "Those break-ins you mentioned last week, did your new security system capture any footage of them?" "Sure did," Johnson replied proudly. "Got 4 digital cameras now. Crystal clear picture, stores everything for 30 days. Sheriff said it was overkill for a town this size, but better safe than sorry." "Mind showing me how it works? I was thinking of getting something similar for my place." The lie came easily. Years undercover had made deception second nature. 10 minutes later, I had convinced Johnson to let me see the system, and when he stepped away to help his wife bring in some boxes, I quickly copied the footage of Sheriff Sheila's traffic stop onto a thumb drive I always carried. The entire incident was captured in high definition. The unauthorized search, the planted evidence, Rico's devastation as he was handcuffed and placed in the back of her cruiser. That night I found myself at the Antler, the local watering hole where Sheriff Sheila held court most evenings. It was a calculated risk, but I needed to understand her patterns, her weaknesses. The bar fell silent when I walked in, conversations dropping to whispers. News traveled fast in small towns. Everyone knew about my run-in with her at the barbecue. I ordered a bourbon neat and took a corner table, nursing the drink slowly. Sheriff Sheila arrived an hour later to the usual chorus of greetings and free drinks. She commanded the room with her presence, laughing too loudly at mediocre jokes from the mayor, accepting deference as her due. When her gaze finally landed on me, her smile hardened into something predatory. I raised my glass slightly in her direction, a subtle acknowledgement that carried just enough challenge to unsettle her. She watched me for a long moment before making her way to my table. The bar grew quiet again as she approached. "Enjoying our little town, Mr. Chicago?" she asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Every minute of it," I replied calmly. "Especially the local color. Saw quite a show over by the old Texaco tonight." Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flash of alarm quickly masked by practiced authority. "Not sure what you mean," she said, but the slight tension in her shoulders told me she understood perfectly. "Just observing that justice works differently here than up north," I replied. "More creative, I guess you could say." Sheriff Sheila leaned down, placing both hands on my table. Her voice dropped to a whisper that only I could hear. "Let me give you some friendly advice. Observers in this town tend to find themselves in unfortunate situations, especially outsiders who do not understand how things work here." I met her gaze without flinching. Funny thing about situations, they have a way of being recorded these days. The color drained from her face for just a moment before she recovered. She straightened up, adjusted her belt, and forced a laugh that did not reach her eyes. "Enjoy your drink, Chicago. It might be your last peaceful night for a while." As she walked away, I could feel the weight of every eye in the bar upon me. I had just painted a target on my back. But more importantly, I had planted a seed of doubt in Sheriff Sheila's mind. She would be wondering what I had seen, what I knew, what evidence I might possess. The game had changed. She was no longer hunting me. We were hunting each other, and only one of us knew the true stakes. Finding cracks in Sheriff Sheila's empire required patience and strategy. Like any corrupt system, her power structure was built on fear and loyalty, but rarely was that loyalty freely given. It was coerced, maintained through threats and shared culpability. I needed to find someone inside her circle who still had enough conscience left to recognize the wrong they were participating in. I spent 2 weeks carefully observing her deputies, looking for signs of discontent or moral conflict. Most avoided eye contact with townspeople who had suffered under Sheila's reign. But 2 showed subtle signs of discomfort with her methods, Deputy Collins and Deputy Hall. Collins was younger, probably fresh from the academy. He flinched whenever Sheila raised her voice and often found reasons to be elsewhere during her more questionable activities. Hall was different, older, experienced, with a weariness around his eyes that spoke of a man carrying heavy regrets. He executed Sheila's orders, but something in his demeanor suggested he was merely going through motions he had long stopped believing in. I approached Collins first, casually bumping into him at the gas station when he was off duty. He recognized me immediately as the BBQ troublemaker and nearly bolted when I tried to engage him in conversation. "I am not looking for problems," he said nervously, glancing around as though Sheila might appear at any moment. "Just trying to do my job." "And what exactly is that job, deputy?" I asked quietly. "Following orders or upholding the law, because from what I have seen, those 2 things are not the same in this town." He paled, mumbled something about being late, and practically ran to his car. The encounter confirmed my suspicion. Collins was uncomfortable but too frightened to act. Hall would be my better option. 3 days later, I found my opportunity. Hall stopped for coffee every morning at the same diner where Jess worked. I timed my arrival to coincide with his, taking a booth near the back where we could speak privately. When he entered, I caught his eye and gestured to the empty seat across from me. His expression hardened, but after a moment's hesitation, he walked over. "Whatever you are selling, I am not buying," he said, remaining standing. "Sheriff warned us all about you." "I imagine she did," I replied calmly, "but I wonder what she would say about this." I slid my phone across the table, showing him the video of Sheila planting evidence in Rico's truck. Hall's face remained impassive, but his eyes widened slightly, a small tell that spoke volumes. "Camera footage gets manipulated all the time," he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. "Sit down, Deputy Hall," I said quietly. "Not for me, for yourself, for what is left of the oath you took." Something broke in his expression then. He sank into the seat across from me, suddenly looking every one of his 50-something years. "You have no idea what you are messing with," he whispered. "She owns this town, has for 15 years. "Tell me about the night she covered up her nephew's drunk driving accident," I said, taking a calculated risk based on town gossip I had overheard. Hall's head snapped up, shock evident on his face. "How do you know about that?" "I know more than you think, but I need the details, I need proof." For a long moment he was silent, wrestling with demons I could only imagine. Finally he spoke, his voice barely audible. 3 years ago, the mayor's son, Sheila's nephew, wrapped his car around a tree after leaving the Antler. Blood alcohol was twice the legal limit. There was a girl with him, local kid, 17 years old. She was injured badly. Sheila made us change the report, list the girl as the driver. The girl's family tried to fight it, but suddenly they were facing drug charges, housing code violations, all kinds of harassment. They moved away eventually. "And you have proof of this?" I pressed gently. Hall stared into his coffee. "I kept copies, scanned the original reports before she made us change them. I tell myself it was for protection, but really, I just could not live with it completely. Not that I had the guts to do anything about it." "Until now," I suggested. He looked up at me, years of suppressed guilt visible in his eyes. "Who are you, really? You are not just some retiree from Chicago." I maintained my cover, but gave him enough truth to secure his trust. "I am someone who has the power to end this, Deputy Hall, but I need your help." 3 days later, we met again, this time at a fishing spot 20 miles outside of town. Hall arrived looking nervous but determined. He handed me a thumb drive hidden inside a diner napkin holder. "Everything is there," he said, his voice steadier than before. "The drunk driving cover-up, falsified drug arrests, evidence tampering in at least 6 cases, reports she forced us to rewrite, complaints that mysteriously disappeared. There is even audio of her threatening the last district attorney who tried to investigate her." I pocketed the drive, already calculating how to verify its contents without compromising my cover. "What happens now?" Hall asked, looking simultaneously relieved and terrified. "Now we build a case that not even her connections can bury," I explained. "But I need one more piece. I need to catch her in the act, with multiple witnesses and irrefutable evidence." "She will be careful around you now," Hall warned. "She knows you are watching." "That is exactly what I am counting on," I replied. "Sometimes the best way to catch a predator is to become the bait." As Hall drove away, I felt the first real surge of optimism since beginning this operation. The foundation of Sheila's corrupt empire was starting to crumble. Her power had always depended on silence and fear. But fear had turned to resentment, and silence was giving way to testimony. The tide was turning. Soon, Sheriff Sheila would learn that badges do not make tyrants untouchable, they just make their fall more spectacular. They say lightning never strikes twice in the same place, but I was betting that Sheriff Sheila's arrogance would prove more predictable than nature. 3 weeks after our confrontation at the Antler, I staged another backyard barbecue. It was an exact replica of the first. Same folding chairs arranged in casual groups, same portable grill sending fragrant smoke into the afternoon air, same cooler of drinks resting in the shade. The only differences were invisible to the untrained eye. This time, 3 of my guests were actually FBI agents who had slipped into town under various pretexts. They blended perfectly with the locals who had accepted my invitations. This time, Deputy Hall wore a wire beneath his casual polo shirt, having agreed to attend off-duty. And this time, 4 hidden cameras with crystal-clear audio capture had been strategically placed around my property. The trap was set. I just needed the target to take the bait. I did not have to wait long. The gathering had barely reached full swing when the familiar sound of tires on gravel announced her arrival. Sheriff Sheila emerged from her cruiser looking not smug and controlled as before, but visibly agitated. Her hand rested unnecessarily on her holster as she surveyed the scene, her eyes narrowing at the sight of familiar faces from town, enjoying themselves on my property. "Afternoon, Sheriff," I called out pleasantly, flipping a burger on the grill. "Care for something to eat?" "What exactly do you think you are doing?" she demanded, ignoring my offer as she stalked toward me. "Hosting friends," I replied simply. "Beautiful day for it." "Friends," she repeated, the word dripping with suspicion. "Funny how a man who just moved to town suddenly has so many friends." I noticed the barely perceptible tremor in her right hand. The confident predator I had met at my first barbecue had been replaced by something more dangerous, a cornered animal. The past weeks of quiet investigation had clearly unnerved her more than I had anticipated. She had been watching me watching her, and the psychological toll was evident. "You need a permit for gatherings of this size," she announced loudly, though there were fewer than 20 people present. "Actually, county ordinance only requires permits for gatherings exceeding 50 persons, came a calm voice from behind her. Deputy Hall approached slowly, a cold drink in his hand. "This looks well under the limit to me, Sheriff." Sheila whirled to face him, genuine shock registering on her face at this unexpected insubordination. "What are you doing here, Hall?" she hissed. "And out of uniform." "Day off," he replied evenly. "Mark here invited me, good burgers." Something dangerous flashed in her eyes. I could almost see her recalculating, reassessing the threat landscape. The presence of one of her own deputies at my gathering had thrown her completely off balance. "This is still trespassing," she insisted, turning back to me. "I have had complaints about noise." "From whom?" I asked innocently. "All my neighbors are here." I gestured to the Johnsons and the Wilsons who lived on either side of my rental property. And loitering, she added desperately, disturbing the peace. The gathering had gone silent, everyone watching the confrontation unfold. I maintained an expression of polite confusion, though inside I was cataloging every procedural violation she was committing in real time. "Sheriff," I said calmly, "I understand you have a job to do, but I can assure you everything here is well within legal limits. Perhaps you would like to take a moment to—" "Shut up," she suddenly shouted, her composure cracking entirely. "I know what you are doing. You think I do not see it. You come to my town, asking questions, turning my people against me." The outburst sent a ripple of shock through the onlookers. Even those who feared her seemed stunned by this uncharacteristic loss of control. "Sheriff Sheila," I began again, keeping my voice steady, "I think perhaps—" She moved with unexpected speed for someone her size. Before I could finish my sentence, she had grabbed my arm, twisting it behind my back with practiced brutality. The pain was immediate and intense. "You are under arrest," she snarled, loud enough for everyone to hear, "for trespassing, disturbing the peace, resisting an officer, and inciting civil unrest." "I have not resisted anything," I replied, wincing as she applied more pressure to my twisted arm. "You just did," she said, her voice now eerily calm. Then, raising her voice to address the shocked gathering, "Anyone who does not clear this property in the next 60 seconds will join him in lockup." No one moved. Not even her most fearful subjects were buying this transparent abuse of power. She slapped the handcuffs on tight enough to cut off circulation, then leaned close to my ear. "I warned you," she whispered. "I told you observers in this town find themselves in unfortunate situations." "Is that a threat, Sheriff?" I asked loudly enough for the nearest hidden microphone to pick up clearly. "It is a promise," she replied, equally loud. "By the time I am done with you, you will wish you had never heard of this town." As she roughly marched me toward her cruiser, I caught Deputy Hall's eye. A nearly imperceptible nod confirmed that everything had been recorded. Every threat, every procedural violation, every abuse of power. She shoved me into the back seat with unnecessary force. As the door slammed shut, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. Sheriff Sheila believed she was teaching me a lesson about power. She had no idea she had just signed the warrant for her own professional execution. The cruiser pulled away from my property, leaving behind a stunned but resolute group of witnesses, and enough evidence to end Sheriff Sheila's reign once and for all. The booking room at the county sheriff's station smelled of industrial disinfectant and stale coffee. Sheriff Sheila personally fingerprinted me, taking sadistic pleasure in pressing my fingers harder than necessary against the ink pad and paper. Her deputies stood at attention, watching the spectacle with varying degrees of discomfort. Deputy Hall was conspicuously absent, having been ordered to remain at the barbecue scene to monitor the situation. "Full name," Sheila demanded, though she had my ID sitting right in front of her. "Mark Wilson," I replied calmly, maintaining my cover. "Occupation?" She smirked as she asked, clearly believing she already knew the answer. "I told you when we first met. Retired factory supervisor from Chicago." She laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Right, and I am the Queen of England." She leaned across the booking desk, invading my personal space. "What are you really doing in my town? FBI? State police? Whatever it is, you failed spectacularly." I remained silent, my expression neutral. Years of undercover work had taught me the power of silence when opponents are desperate for reaction. Her frustration mounted visibly with each passing second. "Put him in holding cell 3, she finally ordered a young deputy. "No phone call, no visitors." "Sheriff," the deputy objected hesitantly, "regulations say all detainees are entitled to—" "Did I stutter?" she snapped, causing the young man to flinch. "Cell 3 now." As the deputy led me away, the front doors of the station burst open. 3 men and 2 women in suits entered with the coordinated efficiency that immediately identified them as federal agents. I recognized the lead agent instantly, Assistant Special Agent in Charge Thomas Ramirez, my direct supervisor from the Chicago field office. The station fell silent. Sheriff Sheila turned slowly, her hand instinctively moving toward her sidearm before she registered the FBI credentials being displayed. "Sheriff Sheila Barton?" Agent Ramirez asked, though it was clearly not a question. "What is the meaning of this?" Sheila demanded, but the former authority in her voice had diminished to a nervous tremor. "I am Assistant Special Agent in Charge Thomas Ramirez, FBI. We are here to take custody of one of your detainees." His voice was professionally neutral, giving away nothing. Sheila's gaze darted between Ramirez and me, confusion evident on her face. "On what authority?" "Federal authority," Ramirez replied simply, handing her a document. "We will also need access to your evidence room and files relating to several cases our office is investigating." The color drained from Sheila's face as she scanned the document. "This is absurd. You cannot just waltz in here and—" "Release the handcuffs, deputy," Ramirez instructed the young officer still holding my arm, completely ignoring Sheila's protests. The deputy looked to Sheila for guidance, but when she offered none, he produced the key and unlocked my restraints. I rubbed my wrists, restoring circulation to my hands, and nodded my thanks to the confused young man. "Agent Daniels," Ramirez said, addressing me formally for the first time, "are you injured?" The station erupted in shocked murmurs. Sheriff Sheila's jaw literally dropped as the realization hit her like a physical blow. "No, sir, I am fine." I straightened my posture, no longer playing the role of intimidated civilian. Though Sheriff Barton might have some explaining to do about unnecessary force during arrest. "Agent," Sheila whispered, her voice barely audible over the commotion. "You are FBI." "Special Agent Marcus Daniels, FBI Public Corruption Squad," I confirmed, meeting her gaze directly. "I have been assigned to this region for the past 3 months investigating a firearms trafficking network. But thanks to our interaction at my first barbecue, you became a person of interest in a separate investigation." Her face contorted with rage and disbelief. "This is entrapment. You set me up." "No, Sheriff," I replied calmly. "You set yourself up the moment you decided to abuse your authority. My assignment had nothing to do with you until you made it about you." On cue, another agent entered with Deputy Hall. Sheriff Sheila's expression transformed from rage to betrayal when she saw her longtime deputy standing shoulder to shoulder with federal agents. "Hall, you too." The hurt in her voice almost sounded genuine. "I remembered my oath, Sheila," Hall replied quietly. "The real one about upholding the law, not the one you forced on us about personal loyalty." Agent Ramirez nodded to another agent who stepped forward with handcuffs. "Sheriff Sheila Barton, you are under arrest for civil rights violations under color of authority, evidence tampering, witness intimidation, and conspiracy to obstruct justice." The booking room had become crowded with deputies and administrative staff, all watching in stunned silence as the woman who had ruled their lives with fear for years was read her Miranda rights. The irony of seeing her processed at the same desk where she had just been booking me was not lost on anyone present. Town officials began arriving as news spread. The mayor burst in, his face ashen. "There must be some mistake," he stammered, looking desperately between the FBI agents and Sheila. "No mistake, Mayor," Agent Ramirez replied. "We have extensive evidence of systematic corruption in this department under Sheriff Barton's leadership, evidence that may implicate other officials as well." The implied threat was not subtle, and the mayor visibly shrank back. As federal agents began sealing off evidence rooms and securing computers, I approached Sheriff Sheila one last time. She stood rigidly in handcuffs, her expression vacillating between shock and fury. "Why?" she asked when I stopped before her. "Why me?" "It was never supposed to be about you," I answered honestly. "But power corrupts, Sheriff, and you had too much power with too little oversight for too long." "I protected this town," she insisted, though the conviction in her voice was fatting. "I kept order." "No," I corrected gently. "You terrorized this town. There is a difference." As agents prepared to transport her to the federal holding facility in the next county, she fixed me with one final glare. "I was your FBI handler the whole time," I told her quietly, "while you thought you were handling me." The look of complete defeat that crossed her face was the only acknowledgement I needed that justice, long delayed in this small town, had finally arrived. The aftermath of Sheriff Sheila's arrest moved through the town like a cleansing fire, painful but purifying. Within 48 hours, news vans from 3 different states had descended upon the previously anonymous community. National outlets picked up the story of small-town corruption exposed by an undercover FBI operation. Sheila's mugshot appeared on screens across the country, her formerly intimidating uniform replaced by a prison jumpsuit, her expression a mixture of defiance and fear. I watched it unfold from the periphery, maintaining a low profile as the operation transitioned from undercover work to the more public phase of building a prosecution. My cover identity had been compromised by necessity, but my role in subsequent investigations remained confidential. Agent Ramirez handled press inquiries with practiced discretion, focusing on the crimes rather than the methods used to uncover them. The revelations came in waves. First, the obvious abuses of power, wrongful arrests, fabricated evidence, intimidation of witnesses. Then the deeper corruption, kickbacks from local businesses, manipulation of county contracts, selective enforcement of laws based on personal relationships. With each new disclosure, more victims found the courage to come forward with their stories. 5 days after the arrest, I was present when Jess's brother was released from the county detention center where he had been held for 6 months on manufactured charges. Jess stood outside the gates, tears streaming down her face as her brother emerged, thinner and harder-eyed than in the photographs she had shown me, but alive and now free. "They just came and told me the charges were dropped," he said, hugging his sister tightly. "No explanation, no apology, just you can go now." "It is not enough," Jess said fiercely, looking over her brother's shoulder at me. "They stole months of his life. There has to be more justice than this." "There will be," I assured her. "This is just the beginning. Civil suits will follow, compensation, and accountability all the way up the chain." 2 days later, I watched from across the street as Rico Mendez unlocked the doors of his father's garage for the first time since his arrest. The drug charges against him had been among the first to be dismissed, as the extent of Sheila's evidence planting became clear. His father stood beside him, one arm around his son's shoulders, both men blinking back tears as they prepared to rebuild their lives and business. I had maintained my distance from them deliberately. They did not need to know my role in their liberation. The knowledge that justice had been served would have to be enough. The transformation of the town itself was remarkable to witness. People who had walked with hunched shoulders and downcast eyes now stood straighter, spoke more freely. At the local diner, conversations that would once have ceased at the appearance of a deputy now continued uninterrupted. The atmosphere of fear that had hung over everyday interactions began to dissipate, replaced by cautious optimism and then genuine hope. Deputy Hall, who had risked everything to stand against corruption, was appointed interim sheriff by the county commissioners. His first official act was to open all internal affairs files to federal investigators, his second to establish a civilian oversight committee. When I visited him in his new office, Sheila's former domain now stripped of her personal touches, he seemed simultaneously burdened and liberated by his new responsibilities. "Never wanted this job," he admitted, gesturing to the sheriff's badge he now wore. "Always figured Sheila would retire and hand it to one of her favorites." "Sometimes leadership finds you rather than the other way around," I observed. "The town trusts you." "Trust needs to be in the system, not in individuals," he replied, surprising me with his insight. "That was Sheila's fundamental mistake. She made it about her, not about the law." A week later, as federal prosecutors prepared indictments against Sheila and 2 of her most corrupt deputies, I received notice that my reassignment had been approved. My work in this town was complete. The firearms trafficking investigation that had originally brought me here would be handled by other agents. My testimony in Sheila's case would be required eventually, but not for months. On my last evening in town, I took a final walk through the main square. Summer was giving way to early fall, and the park at the center of town was alive with activity. A community event was underway, tables laden with potluck dishes, children playing on the grass, adults mingling freely. A hand-painted banner hung between 2 trees. Community barbecue and fireworks, all welcome. I smiled at the symbolic reclamation. What had once been deemed suspicious and worthy of arrest was now being celebrated as the very essence of community. The center of the park had been set up for a fireworks display later that evening, a literal and figurative light show to mark the town's new beginning. As I turned to leave, I noticed Jess approaching with deliberate purpose. "You are leaving," she said. It was not a question. "My work here is done," I replied simply. "We know it was you," she said quietly. "Not the details, but enough. Rico's father recognized you from the hardware store. You were watching when Sheila planted the drugs. The timing of everything. It adds up." I neither confirmed nor denied, maintaining the professional distance my role required. "Will we ever know your real name?" she asked. "Better that you do not," I told her gently. "The story belongs to this town now, not to me." She nodded, understanding the boundaries even if she did not like them. "Whoever you are, thank you, not just from me, from all of us." I accepted her gratitude with a nod, then turned and walked away as the first fireworks began to illuminate the darkening sky. Their bright explosions cast long shadows across the ground, reminders that even in moments of celebration, darkness remains. But now it was a darkness defined and contained by light, not the other way around. I drove out of town the same way I had arrived 3 months earlier, quietly, anonymously, just another traveler passing through. In my rearview mirror, the fireworks continued to burst above the small town that had found its voice again. My name would never appear in their story. I would be, at most, a footnote in the official records, perhaps a vague memory that would fade with time. But the justice we had delivered together would endure long after those memories faded. And in the end, that was the only legacy that mattered.